The first time Amber Talesdo died, she was carrying a child and standing beside a husband she believed had never loved her. The emperor had branded Duke Calix Talesdo a traitor, dragged the couple from their home, and ordered both of them executed. Amber begged for the life growing inside her. Calix, already wounded and powerless, begged for Amber instead. Neither plea mattered. The emperor coldly reminded her that the child carried Talesdo blood and therefore had to disappear with the rest of the family. That final moment forced Amber to face the truth she had avoided for 10 miserable years. She had spent her marriage waiting for other people to decide her life. She had obeyed her cruel mother-in-law, accepted every insult from the household, surrendered her dowry, and assumed Calix's silence meant hatred.
She never demanded an explanation. She never tried to understand the ruined Eastern territory she had married into. Even when the danger around the ducal family grew obvious, she remained frightened and passive until there was no future left to protect. As the executioner raised his weapon, Amber's greatest regret was not that she had lost. It was that she had never truly fought.
She wished for one more chance to act before Calix became a scarred and distant war hero and before their unborn child was condemned with them. Her wish was answered. Amber opened her eyes beneath a bridal veil, 10 years in the past, on the day of her marriage. She was 20 again. The cold castle, the unfamiliar Eastern servants, and the imperial marriage order were all exactly as she remembered.
Yet Amber was no longer the frightened bride who had arrived from the wealthy West. She carried 10 years of painful memories, the knowledge of several future disasters, and one firm decision. This time, she would not wait quietly for death. The woman who had once been known as the abandoned Duchess was about to take control of her own household. To survive, however, she would have to change more than herself. She would have to save the East, expose the people who profited from its suffering, prevent the imperial family from destroying the Talesdos, and somehow understand the young Calix she had never truly known. Expanded scene. Why the first timeline failed. Amber's tragedy did not begin with the emperor's accusation. It began with a series of smaller silences. On the journey east, strangers described the Talesdo territory as if it were a frozen prison. They spoke about monsters, famine, and the Duke's brutal reputation. Amber listened without anyone beside her to explain what was true and what was prejudice. By the time she reached the castle, she expected rejection, and every awkward event confirmed that expectation. Calix's absence from the wedding was the first wound.
The reason was military, but no one explained it with care. Belladonna turned the absence into proof that Amber had no value. Servants repeated the insult until it became the household's accepted story. When the dowry disappeared into Belladonna's accounts, Amber lacked the confidence and information to challenge the transaction. She believed obedience was the safest way to earn acceptance. The second wound was isolation. Calix spent long periods in the field because Eastern villages could not defend themselves from monsters. Later, the emperor sent him to war. Amber saw only an empty seat at meals and a bedroom that never felt shared. She did not see Calix begging for imperial aid, calculating how many people would starve, or selling monster materials to cover expenses. He did not see Amber being controlled by Belladonna, mocked by servants, and deprived of any role in the territory. Their marriage became a structure built entirely from inaccurate conclusions. Amber thought Calix hated her because he stayed away. Calix thought Amber despised the East and would leave if she saw its full misery. Amber thought his silence was indifference. Calix thought silence protected her from burdens she never chose. Both of them believed they were sparing the other, and the result was 10 years in which neither one offered the truth. When their first night finally occurred after the long war, the emotional distance was already enormous.
Amber had imagined that marriage might someday become like the romantic stories she read. Instead, the encounter was awkward, painful, and without tenderness, because two exhausted strangers had no language for intimacy. The pregnancy that followed gave Amber hope. For the first time, she possessed something she considered truly hers. Calix's statement that he did not want a child destroyed that hope. The later prison conversation suggests his real fear was inheritance and survival. As the Emperor closed in on the Talesdos, a child carrying their blood would become another target. Calix may also have feared becoming like his own father, or bringing a life into a territory always at war. Amber did not know any of this. She heard only rejection. At the execution, Calix's final instinct was to save Amber. Amber's final instinct was to save their child. The Emperor used their love and fear against them. Only in that moment did Amber realize that Calix had never been as heartless as she believed. Unfortunately, the realization came too late to change anything. Regression therefore gives Amber more than future knowledge. It gives her the ability to notice how disasters are created. The Emperor's blade is the final event, but isolation, poor communication, economic dependence, and Belladonna's control are the conditions that make that blade possible. Amber's second life begins by attacking those conditions one at a time. Chapter 1. The Bride Who Remembered the Future. Amber's first arrival in the East had been a shock. She came from the commercially powerful Light family in the West, where warm estates, rich markets, and open social customs were normal. The Eastern Territory was cold, poor, and exhausted by monster waves. Fields had withered. Villages struggled to survive. Even the castle looked neglected compared with the homes Amber had known. In her original life, fear made every difference feel like proof that she did not belong. Calix failed to attend the wedding ceremony because he was preparing to lead a monster subjugation. Amber interpreted his absence as rejection. The servants whispered that the Duke hated his bride. Belladonna Talesdo, the former Duchess and Calix's stepmother, immediately took control of Amber's dowry under the excuse of managing the territory. Amber was too intimidated to object. That first decision shaped the next decade. Without money, authority, or trustworthy attendants, Amber became dependent on Belladonna's household. Calix remained away for long campaigns and eventually the Emperor's wars. When he returned, he was a colder man, covered in scars. Their first real night together came years after the wedding and felt less like intimacy than an obligation between strangers. Amber became pregnant, but even that did not unite them. Calix said he did not want a child, and Amber assumed he did not want her either. Now, standing in the same castle 10 years earlier, Amber recognized every trap. Headmaid Grace arrived with Belladonna's orders and expected the new bride to obey. Amber remembered being tormented by Grace and Belladonna until she no longer had the courage to speak. She also remembered that Calix's supposedly necessary expedition on the wedding night was not necessary at all. The monster wave that year was too small to require the Duke personally. His departure left the castle under Belladonna's control and prevented Amber from being publicly acknowledged as its new mistress. Instead of retreating to her room, Amber demanded to see Calix before he left. The servants were stunned. The bride who had trembled only moments earlier suddenly insisted that greeting the knights and speaking with her husband were duties of the Duchess of Talesdo. Grace had no legitimate reason to refuse. Amber walked through the castle she once despised and felt another painful realization. She had hated the place for years, yet watching it burn in her previous life had broken her heart. However imperfect it was, this castle had become her home. When Amber finally saw Calix, she nearly lost her composure. The man before her was only 24. He had none of the scars she remembered, and the coldness around him had not yet hardened into something impenetrable. He was blunt and awkward, but not cruel.
More importantly, he looked genuinely flustered when Amber introduced herself as his wife and accused him of leaving without seeing his bride. Amber refused to be distracted by his youth or his unexpected reaction. She asked him directly not to go. Expanded scene. Amber reads the wedding day differently. The same castle appears different when Amber returns. In her first life, cracked walls and cold rooms felt like insults directed at her. In the second, she notices that the castle itself has been neglected because every available resource goes towards survival. The worn stone is not evidence that the Talesdos prepared an inferior home for their bride. It is evidence that the entire territory is running out of money. The servants also look different. Some are openly loyal to Belladonna, but others are simply frightened workers following the strongest person in the household.
Amber no longer treats every whisper as an enemy. She watches who speaks, who looks away, and who responds when someone weaker is threatened. That is how she identifies Genia's courage and later understands why more maids join her. Grace's attempt to order Amber around becomes a test. Amber does not shout or demand punishment. She states her title, her rights, and her intention to fulfill her duties. The method matters. If Amber behaves like another tyrant, servants will obey her only while Calix is present. If she demonstrates competence and fairness, they may choose her even when Belladonna is watching. The walk to Calix's preparation area is also a confrontation with memory. Amber recalls the future castle burning and the people who died inside it. She once wanted to escape the East, but in death, she understood that belonging is not created only by comfort. 10 years of suffering had tied her to the land, and the child she carried made its future inseparable from her own. Calix's youth unsettles her because she has spent years remembering a man shaped by war. The younger Duke has a controlled expression, yet he lacks the scars and oppressive presence of his future self. He is not warm, but his coldness has not become cruelty. Amber must constantly remind herself that he has not committed the failures she remembers. Punishing him for the future would repeat the same mistake she is trying to correct, acting on assumptions rather than present evidence. Her first conversation with Calix therefore becomes a model for every later victory. She presents facts about the monster wave, explains the social consequence of his departure, and asks for a specific change. Calix, who is accustomed to people either obeying him or demanding resources without understanding the East, is surprised by a bride who knows the situation and offers a practical alternative. His quick agreement reveals that the original expedition was partly avoidance. Calix did not know how to face a wealthy bride he believed he could not support. Fighting monsters was a duty he understood. Marriage was not. Amber mistakes that anxiety for hatred because she has never seen Calix flustered. The reader, however, can see that the young Duke is already affected by her. When Amber requests honorifics, she is not being vain. Language is political power inside the castle. Belladonna's authority survives because everyone treats her as the active Duchess. By changing how Calix addresses Amber in public, Amber changes the hierarchy without dismissing a single servant. The announcement that he will remain at the castle confirms the change. One conversation does what years of silent endurance never could. Chapter 2, Amber makes her first demands. Calix answered that monster subjugation was necessary in the East. Amber told him she had already investigated the current wave through the Light family's merchant network. The monsters were fewer than usual, and a capable commander could lead the knights without the Duke. She admitted that part of her reason was personal. She did not want to spend her first night alone in a foreign castle while everyone concluded that her husband had abandoned her. Then Amber said what her younger self had never dared to say. She understood that Calix might not have chosen the marriage, but she still deserved respect. He had missed the ceremony and intended to miss the first night. If he left immediately, Belladonna's people would treat Amber as a temporary guest rather than the ruling Duchess. Amber asked him to remain long enough to establish her position and help her adapt to the East. She expected an argument. Calix agreed almost at once. He announced that Sir Zeit, the experienced knight commander, would lead the subjugation instead. The assembled knights accepted the order. Amber was stunned by how easily the future changed once she spoke clearly. In her previous life, she had built an image of Calix as an unmovable wall.
The young man in front of her listened when she gave him a reasonable explanation. Amber made one more request. She asked Calix to use honorifics and address her with the respect due to his wife. Eastern marriages were conservative, and a husband's public language determined how the household treated his bride. If the Duke spoke to Amber as a subordinate, every servant loyal to Belladonna would do the same. Calix again agreed. He corrected himself and promised to see Madam in the morning. A simple phrase shook Amber more than she wanted to admit. The future Calix, she remembered, had rarely spoken gently. She told herself that this did not mean he had changed. He was still the same man who would eventually become distant. Her priority was not romance. Her priority was building an independent position inside a castle filled with Belladonna's allies. At dawn, Amber went to the laundry area to find Genia, a low-ranking maid who had once been the only person to comfort her. In the previous life, Genia had secretly brought food when Amber was neglected and tried to explain that Calix's absences were caused by monster hunts and imperial orders rather than personal hatred. Amber had been too consumed by loneliness to understand how valuable that kindness was. This time, Amber intended to meet Genia first and bring her into her service before Belladonna could isolate them. Instead, Amber found Belladonna berating the laundry maids. Belladonna mistook Amber for a servant and ordered her to explain why she was wandering after sunrise. Amber calmly asked Belladonna to introduce herself first. When the older woman declared that her word was law inside the castle, Amber corrected the misunderstanding. She was not a maid. She was Amber Talesdo, the new mistress of the castle. Belladonna recovered quickly and introduced herself as the former Duchess. She spoke as though Amber were an ignorant child from the West who needed to be educated. Then she announced that Amber's entire dowry would be placed at Belladonna's disposal to manage the territory. In front of the servants, she implied Amber wanted the jewels only to continue a life of luxury. The old Amber would have surrendered. The new Amber used Belladonna's own rules against her. Chapter 3. The First Battle Inside the Castle. Amber acknowledged that Eastern custom respected the eldest member of the family. She then reminded Belladonna that imperial law stood above local custom. If a married woman's property legally belonged to her husband, the Duke's opinion was required before anyone could seize it. Amber emphasized that Belladonna was the previous Duchess. Her authority was no longer absolute. Belladonna's composure cracked. She raised her hand to strike Amber, but Genia stepped between them and was knocked down. Belladonna threatened to flog the maid for interfering. Amber immediately defended Genia. Rank did not justify thoughtless violence, and the current mistress of the castle would not permit a servant to be beaten for protecting her. The confrontation became dangerous. Belladonna warned Amber that choosing a maid over her would make them enemies. Before the older woman could continue, Calix entered and demanded to know what was happening. Amber remembered that in her first life, Calix had never openly opposed Belladonna because his father had favored her and Calix had been conditioned to obey the former Duke's decisions. She expected him to remain neutral. Instead, Calix questioned Belladonna's attempt to take his wife's dowry. When Belladonna insisted she was merely helping the new bride, Calix said he would discuss the matter with Amber himself. He then told his wife to stand and asked a servant to guide Genia to treatment. Calix's public support changed the atmosphere instantly. Belladonna could no longer pretend that Amber had no authority. Yet Amber misread Calix again. When he offered to return the entire dowry, he explained that Amber would have a difficult life in the East without her wealth. Amber heard the same insult Belladonna had used and assumed Calix thought she cared only about luxury.
Calix, meanwhile, interpreted Amber's guarded response as proof that she did not trust him. Their conversation revealed the central problem of their marriage. Both of them acted on assumptions instead of saying what they meant. Amber followed the injured Jania and began rebuilding the alliance she had lost in her first life. She cleaned the maid's wound herself and thanked her sincerely. Jania was overwhelmed that a Duchess would care for a low-ranking worker. Amber corrected the title she used. She did not want to remain a powerless little madam. She intended to become the true Duchess of Talesdo. Jania confessed that many servants had hoped a lady from the West might change the castle. Belladonna's influence reached every corner of the household, and ordinary workers had no one they could trust. After seeing Amber resist Belladonna and protect a maid, Jania knelt and asked to enter her personal service. Amber accepted. Jania became the first person openly on her side. Calix watched these changes with his own confusion. In the original timeline, Amber had seemed terrified, silent, and impossible to approach. Now she challenged Belladonna, investigated the monster wave, and cared about servants she had only just met. Calix also carried burdens Amber had never seen. A memory of his earlier years showed him begging the Emperor for aid while the East suffered drought, monsters, and famine. The imperial family refused because it feared the military power of the Talesdo sword. Calix had learned to bow, fight, and sacrifice because his people had no other protection. He had not avoided Amber because he hated her. He feared he could not afford the kind of life a wealthy Western bride expected. In his mind, monster cores and campaigns were the only ways to earn enough money to support her. The more he worried about disappointing Amber, the more distant he appeared. Neither of them understood the other yet, but the second timeline had already given them opportunities the first one never had. Expanded scene: the dowry dispute as a contest of law. Belladonna's strongest weapon is not physical force. It is the belief that Eastern tradition automatically makes her correct.
She presents herself as the elder who understands the territory, while Amber is a spoiled outsider. By speaking in front of servants, Belladonna attempts to trap Amber. Any protest can be described as selfishness. Any silence can be treated as consent. Amber escapes the trap by separating the issue of helping the East from the issue of ownership. She does not say the territory should receive nothing.
She says Belladonna cannot take everything without legal authority or an accountable plan. The distinction allows Amber to defend her property without appearing indifferent to suffering. The debate also exposes Belladonna's manipulation. If the former Duchess truly intended only to help the people, she would welcome transparent management under Calix and Amber. Instead, she becomes furious when Amber asks for the Duke's opinion. Her anger proves that control, not charity, is the real objective. Jania's intervention gives the conflict a moral center. The maid knows Belladonna can ruin her life, yet she steps forward when the older woman raises a hand. Amber's decision to protect Jania is equally important. Noble households often treat servants as disposable. Amber refuses to secure her own safety by allowing someone weaker to be punished in her place. Calix arrives at the exact moment Belladonna expects family loyalty to silence him. His choice is small in form, but enormous in consequence. He does not attack Belladonna or expose every past wrongdoing. He simply establishes that the dowry is a matter for husband and wife. Belladonna loses the right to speak as though Amber is a child under her guardianship. Amber's misunderstanding of Calix's offer demonstrates that winning political authority does not immediately heal emotional damage. Calix returns the dowry because he fears Amber will suffer without familiar resources. Amber hears contempt because Belladonna has just accused her of loving luxury. The same sentence carries different meanings for each of them. Calix's later thoughts clarify his position. He knows the East cannot provide the comfort Amber once had. He imagines lace, jewelry, and Western food as requirements he cannot meet.
His instinct is to work harder in the field and keep Amber away from the territory's problems.
He believes that if she sees the full truth, she will regret the marriage. Amber's response to the dowry changes that calculation. Instead of preserving the jewels for herself, she plans food, clothing, and heat for the serfs. She demonstrates that she does not need to be protected from the East. She needs the authority to help it. This is the first time Heinrich and the servants see the difference between Amber and Belladonna.
Belladonna uses poverty to justify taking money. Amber uses money to confront poverty and demands records showing where it goes. One method strengthens the former Duchess. The other strengthens the territory. Expanded scene. Genia becomes more than a maid. Genia's role is emotionally important because she represents the kindness Amber failed to value in her first life. The original Amber was so desperate for Calix's attention that she overlooked the person who actually stood beside her.
Genia brought food, offered comfort, and tried to correct rumors about the Duke. Amber remembered the kindness only after losing everything. In the second life, Amber does not merely recruit Genia because future knowledge says she is loyal. She repays a moral debt. Washing the maid's injury with her own hands reverses the usual relationship between noble and servant. Genia expects gratitude to be expressed through a coin or a brief word.
Amber gives time, attention, and respect. This scene also changes Amber's leadership style. She cannot oppose Belladonna alone. The former Duchess controls household routines, appointments, information, and discipline. A ruler without trusted people cannot exercise authority. Genia becomes Amber's first connection to the servants who understand the castle from below. Genia explains why Western origin matters. To many workers, the East's traditions have become excuses for Belladonna's cruelty. They hope an outsider will question rules everyone else accepts.
Amber realizes that her difference, once a source of shame, can become an advantage. She does not need to imitate Belladonna to prove she belongs. The title Little Madam reveals how incomplete Amber's authority remains. Even servants who like her see her as a child beside the great Duchess. Amber corrects Genia gently. She is not demanding empty formality. She is teaching the household to recognize the current mistress. As Genia gains confidence, she becomes useful in practical ways. She identifies reliable workers, reports household moods, and helps Amber avoid isolation. When relief supplies arrive, Genia's pride spreads through the staff. The maids do not support Amber because of a speech. They support her because grain reaches the warehouse and an injured worker is treated like a person. Heinrich provides the other half of Amber's internal alliance. Unlike Genia, he does not respond primarily to emotion. He needs evidence that Amber can manage the duchy. Her budget, understanding of regional trade, and willingness to document every expense earn his respect. Together, Genia and Heinrich give Amber both human trust and administrative capacity. This is why Belladonna's later attempt to trap Amber in the wine room fails. Information moves. People notice when Amber is missing. Bertrand can intervene because the new Duchess is no longer invisible. Amber's improvement is therefore not a magical change in personality. She succeeds because she converts regret into relationships. Every person she ignored or misunderstood before becomes someone she chooses to see clearly now. Expanded scene. Calix's poverty, pride, and awkward affection. Calix is feared as a powerful swordsman, but his private calculations are defined by scarcity. The East once had vineyards and fertile land. 50 years of poisoned soil, reduced rain, and monster waves destroyed that prosperity. The emperor refuses meaningful aid because the imperial family fears the military reputation of the Talesdos. This political situation forces Calix into a humiliating cycle. He must bow to a ruler who wants his house weak, then use the very strength the emperor fears to defend villages the empire neglects. Each victory proves the Talesdos are dangerous. Each loss makes the East more dependent. The imperial marriage adds another burden. Amber belongs to a rich Western family, and Calix assumes she will compare everything in the East with what she lost. He does not resent her wealth.
He is ashamed that he cannot match it. His thought about earning monster cores is revealing. Rather than ask Amber what she wants, he plans to exhaust himself acquiring money for an imagined standard of luxury. This insecurity explains his behavior on the wedding day. Calix understands battle formations and obligations. He does not understand how to welcome a bride. Avoiding the ceremony and leaving on an unnecessary expedition feels safer than allowing Amber to see his inadequacy. When Amber confronts him, her directness is both intimidating and relieving. She gives him a clear problem with a clear solution. Staying at the castle is easy compared with guessing what a wife expects. Using honorifics is easy. Returning a dowry is easy. What Calix cannot manage is Amber's smile, or the possibility that she might actually want his company. His jealousy towards Sir Zate and his disappointment when Amber sends requests through servants are childish, but they reveal unmet emotional needs. Calix wants to be useful to her. Because he has built his identity around duty, being excluded feels like rejection. The first night scene shows both his desire and restraint. Calix waits in the room because he knows the household will judge Amber if they sleep separately. He does not force intimacy. When Amber says they can simply create an appearance and then announces that she dislikes him too, he asks a direct question. Does she not like him? Amber treats it as a practical conversation. Calix hears it as a verdict. Later, when he avoids her, he is not withdrawing affection. He is overwhelmed by it. Bertrand becomes an unwilling accomplice, steering Amber away while Calix trains. Amber eventually forces the conversation neither of them knows how to begin. Calix's embarrassed confession is modest. He does not suddenly declare love. He says Amber does not make him unhappy and admits his behavior has been misleading. For two people whose first marriage ended without mutual understanding, this is a major victory. They are beginning to replace interpretation with questions and answers. Chapter 4. The dowry becomes a weapon against poverty. Amber asked Heinrich Jasper, the butler whose family had served the Talesdos for 3 generations, to review the dowry with her. Heinrich had remained loyal even when the ducal house was accused of treason, but he was cautious. The East distrusted newly wealthy Western nobles, and Amber had arrived only days earlier. She did not demand blind faith. She explained her intentions. During the journey to the castle, Amber had seen ruined fields and starving serfs. She valued their lives more than jewels she could wear at banquets. The dowry was worth at least 5 million stars, enough to support the territory for years if managed carefully. Amber wanted food first, then winter clothing, blankets, medicine, and animal fat for heat, and basic household needs. She asked Heinrich to record where every coin went and to discuss each transaction openly. Her practical planning impressed him. Amber had grown up watching the Light family's commercial network, so budgeting, negotiating, and evaluating merchants were skills rather than mysteries. She had also lived through the future collapse of the East and knew which weaknesses would become fatal. Heinrich agreed to help. Amber immediately discovered one of those weaknesses. The East depended on Count Nosto's commercial network for rice, daily necessities, and weapons. Nosto's people charged unfair prices because no local competitor could challenge them. The Knights' weapons were already worn, and the unavoidable Kale Kingdom War would destroy the ducal house if it began under the same conditions as before. Amber considered a distant supplier outside Nosto's influence. She also began thinking about her own family, though the thought hurt. In the past, she had loved them and believed they loved her. Yet a future memory suggested that the imperial marriage order had originally named her older sister, Natasha Light, as Calix's bride. Amber did not yet understand why she had become the one sent east. Returning to her family for help would force her to face wounds she had avoided. Before that problem could be addressed, Amber and Calix had to survive their first night together. Calix waited in Amber's room because the servants expected the newlyweds to share a bed. He was visibly nervous. Amber, remembering their painful and joyless relationship in the first timeline, assumed they should merely create the appearance of intimacy. She suggested they remain in the room until morning and sleep without touching. Calix asked how she knew he did not want to sleep with her.
Amber answered that his behavior made the conclusion obvious. She also claimed she did not like him, hoping to remove any obligation from his conscience. Calix quietly asked whether she truly disliked him. Amber, focused on future plans, failed to notice how much the answer mattered to him. She fell asleep almost immediately. Calix stayed awake, wounded by the ease with which Amber could leave him emotionally, even while lying only a few feet away.
The misunderstanding continued the next morning, but the day also gave Amber a chance to earn the knight's respect. Sir Zeit's expedition was preparing to depart. Amber remembered that most of these men would later die protecting Calix during the Kale War. She could not promise safety, but she could give them a reason to believe their families and territory would be protected in their absence. Amber introduced herself to the formation and refused to offer empty thanks. She had not lived in the East long enough to claim their loyalty as her achievement. Instead, she promised to care for the people they were leaving behind and ask them to return after completing their duty. The knights, who expected a spoiled Western noblewoman, saw sincerity and responsibility. Their attitude changed. Amber then privately asked Sir Zeit to obtain something during the expedition. She did not reveal the full reason, but the item would be essential to solving the food shortage. Calix was jealous that Amber asked the commander rather than him, yet his duties kept him at the castle, and only Zeit would travel through the required region. Once again, their inability to communicate made a small issue feel personal. Still, the expedition departed under better conditions than in the original timeline. Amber had altered another piece of the future. Expanded scene: household management as political warfare. The castle is a miniature version of the East. Belladonna controls it through monopolies similar to Count Nasto's control of trade. She appoints loyal servants, decides who receives information, controls private rooms, and defines tradition. Anyone who opposes her risks losing employment, status, or safety. Amber's reforms break those monopolies. Genia creates an independent flow of information from the servants.
Heinrich creates accountable financial records. Calix's honorifics create legal and social recognition. Relief supplies create loyalty that does not depend on Belladonna's favor. Even the selection of maids becomes political. Amber asks Genia to recommend trustworthy workers, and Heinrich to find a literate, meticulous lady-in-waiting. She does not simply replace Belladonna's faction with personal favorites. She builds a staff based on competence and mutual obligation. A new applicant named Roxy appears later, and Amber treats the appointment cautiously. Future knowledge does not make every stranger safe. She begins with books and simple duties, allowing behavior to be observed before assigning important work. This measured approach contrasts with the impulsive trust and fear of her first life. Belladonna's response escalates because she can feel control slipping. Public arguments no longer work. Calix has sided with Amber. The servants have seen Genia protected. The dowry is under Amber's management. Lariette and Count Freya give the new Duchess outside allies. Belladonna, therefore, chooses the private wine room and physical punishment. Bertrand's intervention demonstrates the value of distributed loyalty. If Amber had remained isolated, no one would have noticed or dared to act. Because she has begun changing the castle, even people whose full motives are unknown see an opportunity to oppose Belladonna. Administrative competence also protects Amber from accusations of extravagance. Every supply order has a purpose. Every commercial term can be defended. Belladonna can call her insolent, but it becomes harder to call her useless when the warehouses are full. The broader political lesson is that institutions matter. Calix's sword cannot manage accounts or identify corruption.
Amber's future knowledge cannot deliver grain without workers. Personal strength must be converted into systems that continue functioning when the leader is absent. This is why Amber's promise to the knights carries weight. She is not merely saying she will try. She is building a household capable of protecting their families while they fight. The castle begins to function as the center of a territory rather than the private domain of one former duchess. Expanded scene: the former duke and Belladonna's shield. Belladonna's confidence does not come only from habit. The former Duke Calix Talesdo still lives in a separate palace and once favored her strongly.
Calix grew up under that authority and rarely challenged decisions connected to his father. Belladonna, therefore, believes his marriage cannot truly remove her from power. The wine room is one example. Calix allowed Belladonna to use it, and she treats that permission as permanent ownership of part of the castle. When Amber questions the arrangement, Belladonna invokes the absent former duke as though his approval outweighs Calix's current title and Amber's position as the new duchess as a consequence.
This family structure helps explain why Calix behaved passively in the original timeline. He is a formidable swordsman, but authority inside his own home was shaped long before he became duke. Opposing Belladonna may feel like opposing his father and the entire order that raised him. Amber initially assumes his silence proves agreement. The revised timeline shows that he can resist once the conflict is made explicit. Belladonna is careful to avoid direct confrontation with Calix when possible.
She isolates Amber, controls servants, and presents abuse as household discipline. Her strategy depends on keeping Calix uninformed and Amber too frightened to report anything. Amber's new alliances break that protection. Genia notices. Heinrich manages information. Bertrand can enter the wine room with an urgent excuse. Calix begins asking questions rather than accepting Belladonna's version of events. Detlev's exact role remains unresolved in the available chapters. He may be manipulated, indifferent, or actively supportive of Belladonna.
What is clear is that Amber cannot fully control the castle until the older generation's authority is examined. The conflict also mirrors the empire. Just as the emperor uses old hierarchy to keep the East obedient, Belladonna uses family tradition to keep Amber submissive. Both systems present control as duty. Amber's answer in each case is the same. Respect tradition where it protects people, but challenge it when it becomes a shield for exploitation. Calix's development will depend on whether he can separate filial obedience from responsible leadership. Amber cannot make that choice for him, but her presence forces the issue earlier. Every time he supports his wife publicly, he weakens Belladonna's claim that the past still governs the castle. Every time Amber asks for his judgment instead of assuming his refusal, she gives him a chance to act differently.
Their marriage becomes the point where an old household order begins to fracture. That fracture is dangerous, yet it is also necessary. Without it, Belladonna's private power would continue undermining every reform Amber creates and keep the East trapped inside the same cycle of failure again. Chapter 5: Lariat Freya and the Devil's Flower. Amber's next move depended on a young botanist named Lariat Freya. In the future, Lariat would become the first Eastern researcher accepted by the Magic Tower and would discover a clue to the region's poisoned soil. By then, the land would be too damaged to recover quickly. Amber intended to bring that discovery forward by 8 years. She asked Calix to send an invitation in his name to Count Freya and his daughter. Calix agreed, though he looked disappointed when Amber said she would make future requests through servants because he was busy.
He had just told her she could ask him for anything, and now he felt she was creating distance. Amber interpreted his expression as irritation and failed to realize he was pouting. Count Freya arrived with Lariat, a painfully shy girl who had not yet made her social debut. Her father assumed the Duchess wanted a lady-in-waiting. Amber surprised both of them by discussing Lariat's horticultural papers.
She had read the girl's classifications of roots and leaves and her experiments in plant breeding. Lauriette had spent years being told that her interests were useless. Hearing a Duchess describe her work as important nearly brought her to tears. Amber did more than flatter her. She asked Lauriette to help save the East. The region's desolation was not an ordinary drought. For 50 years, precipitation had fallen, the soil had become sick, and most crops died before producing fruit.
One plant survived, Rodan, an ugly flower associated with the land's devastation. Eastern people called it the devil's flower and treated it as a symbol of evil. Amber had no childhood prejudice against Rodan because she came from the West. She saw the fact everyone else ignored. Rodan did not merely endure the poisoned soil.
It used that poison as nourishment and still produced fruit. If Lauriette could identify related plants, select favorable mutations, and breed edible crops with Rodan's resistance, the East might restore food production without waiting for the poison to disappear. Lauriette immediately understood the potential. Rodan had a short growth cycle, making repeated experiments possible.
She could cross compatible lines, observe which traits survived, and build a new crop adapted to Eastern land. Sir Zayat's expedition would bring the additional material Amber had requested. Count Freya, who had doubted his daughter's unusual research, saw that the work could transform an entire territory. Amber told Lauriette never to demean herself again. The girl had talent, and Amber believed she could succeed. In the previous life, Lauriette had required years to gain confidence because no one valued her work. Now she accepted responsibility with tears and promised to trust herself. Calix supported the project by discussing investment with Count Freya. Amber noticed how politely he treated her guest and praised him for handling the financial conversation. When she asked whether he was happy, however, Calix froze. He was emotionally unprepared for her direct warmth. Instead of answering, he left. Amber felt rejected. She had not expected romance, but a simple response would have been enough. Calix, on the other hand, was overwhelmed because Amber's smile affected him far more than he understood. Each was changing the other, while still believing the distance between them remained fixed. The agricultural project was only the beginning. To keep the people alive until new crops could be developed, Amber still needed to liquidate the dowry and defeat the merchants controlling Eastern trade. Expanded scene: why Rodan can change the East. The agricultural problem is one of the story's strongest examples of Amber using memory intelligently rather than simply repeating future facts. She knows that a clue will be discovered 8 years later, but she's not a scientist. She cannot personally breed a new crop or explain every mechanism. Instead, she identifies the person who will possess the necessary expertise and gives her the opportunity earlier. Lauriette is not famous yet. She is a shy girl whose family sees plant research as an eccentric hobby. Her papers receive little attention. Without recognition, she lacks funding, confidence, and access to the region where her work matters most. Amber removes those barriers. Calix's invitation gives social legitimacy. Count Freya's presence protects Lauriette from scandal. The ducal project provides land, money, and a clear objective. Most importantly, Amber treats Lauriette as a researcher rather than a decorative noble daughter. The insight about Rodan is simple enough to be overlooked. The flower is ugly, poisonous in appearance, and associated with the land's decline. Eastern culture labels it evil. Because everyone sees it as a curse, no one asks why it thrives where food crops die. Amber's Western background breaks that bias. She sees a plant performing a function. Lauriette supplies the technical interpretation. Rodan absorbs or uses substances in the contaminated soil. Its short growth cycle allows fast selection. Related plants and mutations may carry useful traits. Hybrid breeding could create edible varieties that survive before the land itself is healed. The plan does not promise an instant harvest. Research requires failures, seasons, and careful observation.
Amber's future knowledge reduces wasted time, but Lariette still must do the work. The story respects that distinction. Amber is valuable because she creates the conditions for talent to succeed. Lariette's emotional transformation mirrors the East's potential. Other people call her gloomy and useless. Amber sees ability hidden beneath poor confidence. The East is treated the same way by the Empire. Barren, dangerous, and not worth investment. Amber believes both can become productive when given support. Count Freya's reaction is also important. He's not a villain. He worries that Lariette's lack of social confidence will damage her future and doubts research can provide security.
Seeing the Duke and Duchess invest in his daughter forces him to reconsider. Amber creates an ally without threatening him. The project also strengthens Amber and Calix as partners. Amber brings the idea and the future clue. Calix provides authority and investment. Lariette provides science. Sir Zayet provides materials. No single person could solve the crisis alone. This cooperative model stands in contrast to Belladonna and Count Nasto, who hoard control. Amber's reforms spread power to capable people.
That is why they can grow beyond her personal knowledge. Chapter 6. Belladonna Strikes Back. Amber's growing authority threatened Belladonna. The former Duchess summoned her to the wine room, a private chamber she treated as proof of her continued power. In the first timeline, Belladonna had used that room to humiliate Amber, ignore her, and reinforce the belief that the new bride had no place in the family. This time, Amber entered without fear. Belladonna criticized her manners and demanded she maintain the room as a subordinate would. Amber replied that management of the castle belonged to the current Duchess. If Belladonna was lonely, she could keep the room for personal use, but Amber would not surrender her title or duties. Belladonna had secretly ensured Calix was occupied at the training ground and ordered the doors closed.
Once they were alone, she produced a whip and called the assault discipline under Eastern family custom. Amber warned that she would regret it. Belladonna struck anyway. A servant interrupted before the beating could continue. Sir Dennis Bertrand forced his way into the room, claiming Heinrich urgently required Amber elsewhere. Bertrand was one of Calix's knights, and had appeared only rarely in Amber's first life. His willingness to defy Belladonna suggested hidden conflicts within the castle.
When Amber questioned his motives, he admitted that they shared an enemy and that he wanted to protect the East. He refused to reveal more. That night, Amber's old trauma returned as a nightmare. She relived captivity, violence, and the destruction of the ducal family. Calix found her in distress and stayed near her until she calmed. Amber woke to the sight of his young, unscarred face and wondered why his presence made her feel safe. The dream also restored an important memory. The weapon that devastated the East in her first life was Durandal, an ancient sword of oath and an imperial artifact. It eventually reached the Emperor and was used against the Talesdos. If Amber could acquire Durandal before it entered Imperial hands, she could remove one of the weapons responsible for her death and the death of her child. The chance came when Baron Rupold, manager of the eastern branch of the Piazza Merchant Guild, offered to purchase Amber's jewels.
Piazza operated under Count Nasto's influence and monopolized essential trade. Rupold was notorious for bad manners, corrupt side deals, and exploiting desperate nobles. Heinrich warned that he would undervalue the dowry. Amber welcomed the meeting. She remembered Rupold from the future. He had helped Belladonna drain money from the duchy, then used the stolen capital to enrich Count Nasto. He also carried a secret. While traveling through Count Zaimoro's territory, Rupold had harassed the Count's daughter. Zaimoa was prepared to close the route Piazza needed to reach the capital. Rupold was desperate to hide the scandal from his superiors. That knowledge gave Amber leverage. All she needed was to make Rupold underestimate her long enough to reveal his plan. Expanded scene: the wine room, Bertrand, and the artifact dream.
Belladonna's wine room represents an older order inside the castle. The former duke allowed her to control it, and Belladonna uses that permission as evidence that her authority survives Calix's marriage. She expects Amber to accept a symbolic position, while the previous Duchess controls real decisions. Amber's refusal attacks the symbol directly. She does not demand that Belladonna abandon every personal comfort. She says Belladonna can keep the room if she wants it, but she cannot use it to command the current Duchess. That distinction again shows Amber's political skill. She is not fighting over furniture. She is fighting over jurisdiction. Belladonna's decision to use a whip reveals what happens when her symbolic power is challenged. She calls violence education and claims Eastern custom gives elders that right. Amber's warning that Belladonna will regret the attack is not empty bravery. By this point, Amber has allies, legal authority, and Calix's public recognition. Bertrand's rescue introduces a hidden network of resistance. He knows Belladonna isolated Amber and arrives with a believable excuse. His statement that they share an enemy suggests the knights are not unified behind the former Duchess. Some may have watched Belladonna damage the territory for years without a noble patron able to oppose her. Amber does not trust Bertrand immediately. Future knowledge helps her identify people, but it does not reveal every motive. Her caution is reasonable. He may oppose Belladonna while pursuing a separate agenda. The source ends before that mystery is solved. The nightmare after the attack connects personal trauma with political danger. Amber relives being restrained and powerless. Calix's presence near her bed provides a new experience. The young man responds to her fear before 10 years of resentment can separate them.
The dream of Durandal is more than a convenient memory. Amber recognizes the exact sword responsible for catastrophic destruction. The artifact represents the Emperor's ability to turn the East's own military culture against it. A sword associated with oaths becomes a weapon of betrayal. Amber knows the sword will pass through commercial and noble hands before reaching the Emperor. She cannot storm an imperial armory. She can, however, control a contract while it is still stored in the East. This is where her merchant upbringing becomes as important as Calix's swordsmanship. The transition from Belladonna's whip to Durandal also emphasizes scale. Amber must defend herself from immediate household violence, but she cannot become so focused on Belladonna that she ignores the weapon capable of killing thousands. Her second life requires attention to both. Chapter 7. Amber defeats a merchant at his own game.
Rupold entered the negotiations convinced that a young Western Duchess stranded in the East had no alternatives. He offered only 2 million stars for jewels worth at least 5 million, with a portion of the payment delayed for 6 months and no proper security. He spoke as though Piazza was doing Amber a favor. Amber rejected the offer. Rupold responded with a lecture about the East.
Piazza controlled food, necessities, and weapons. No other merchant could operate without Count Nasto's interference. Therefore, Amber should be grateful for whatever price he chose. When he finished, Amber mentioned Count Zymo's daughter. Rupold's confidence vanished. Amber explained that she knew his misconduct had endangered Piazza's most important route to the capital. Count Zymo had given him limited time to repair the insult. If Count Nasto learned that Rupold's behavior threatened the entire network, the Baron might lose more than his position. Rupold accused her of blackmail. Amber called it an exchange of grace. She could reveal everything and let Count Nasto dispose of him, or she could provide the one gift Count Zymo wanted and save Rupold's career. In return, Piazza would pay the full 5 million stars and accept her additional condition. The condition was Durandal. The ancient sword was stored in the East and officially valued below its true importance. Rupold knew surrendering it could anger powerful people, but Amber showed that she had already written the legal price and terms into the contract. The transaction would appear legitimate.
Viscount Viral, connected to the sword's storage and future delivery to the Emperor, might fire Rupold or complain, but he could not publicly challenge a signed commercial agreement without exposing other problems. Rupold had no good option. He signed. Amber gained the full value of her jewels, obtained the artifact that had destroyed the East in the previous timeline, and weakened one part of Count Nasto's network without open war.
She used the money exactly as promised. Wagons brought grain, blankets, clothing, and winter supplies to the castle. Storehouses filled. The people who had expected another deadly season began to believe the new Duchess might truly protect them. Amber also gave Genia a piece from her wedding dress as a personal gift. She apologized that her circumstances prevented something grander, but Genia treasured it. More maids began volunteering to work for Amber after witnessing both the relief effort and her treatment of servants. For the first time, Amber saw a winter in the East that could be different. Calix was proud of her, but his emotions created another misunderstanding. After Amber asked whether he was happy about Lariette's project, he had become increasingly flustered around her. Now he avoided meals, trained whenever she entered common rooms, and relied on Bertrand to report where she was. Amber interpreted the behavior as rejection. She had accepted that their marriage was political, but being deliberately avoided frustrated her. She cornered Bertrand, discovered that he had been helping Calix escape awkward encounters, and ordered a direct conversation. Calix feared Amber intended to leave. Amber feared he could not stand being near her. When they finally spoke, she said that if he was unhappy with the marriage, he should be honest rather than avoid her. Calix denied that Amber made him unhappy. With visible embarrassment, he admitted the opposite. His actions looked cold because he did not know how to face feelings he had never experienced. Amber watched the powerful young Duke struggle to express himself, and, for the first time, thought he looked cute. She asked him not to avoid her again. Calix agreed. The emotional breakthrough did not make them a conventional loving couple overnight, but it replaced one dangerous assumption with a real conversation. Amber then raised the next political problem: weapons. Expanded scene: the Piazza negotiation in full. Rupold's offer is designed to exploit 3 assumptions. First, Amber supposedly needs immediate cash. Second, no Eastern buyer can challenge Piazza. Third, a noblewoman will avoid public scandal and accept vague promises rather than conduct a hostile negotiation. Amber defeats each assumption. She has already discussed valuation with Heinrich, so she knows the jewels are worth 5 million stars. She is willing to reject delayed payment. And unlike Rupold, she understands that scandal is not merely embarrassing, it is a commercial weapon. Rupold's misconduct toward Count Zymo's daughter threatens the road Piazza uses to reach the capital. Trade networks depend on permission, storage, security, and local cooperation. Losing one route can make the eastern branch unprofitable. Count Nasto will not forgive a subordinate whose personal behavior damages that system. Amber does not immediately expose Rupold because exposure alone would produce chaos. Piazza still controls necessities, and Count Zymo's anger does not automatically create a replacement merchant. Amber uses the secret to obtain resources and an artifact while buying time for a new trade route. Her language mirrors Rupold's. When he calls his unfair offer a grace, she later calls her silence a grace. This forces him to experience the power imbalance he normally imposes on others. The request for Durandal shocks him because it appears unrelated to jewelry. Amber deliberately combines transactions. Rupold needs both the purchase and the scandal resolved. He cannot accept one condition while refusing the other without risking exposure. The contract protects Amber. It records the official price of the sword and the full jewel payment. Rupold may privately resent the deal, but legal documents make it harder for his superiors to accuse Amber of theft. Her father taught her that negotiation is not only about winning a conversation, it is about controlling what happens after everyone leaves the room. Amber also chooses a solution for Count Zaimo. The source does not fully reveal the gift, but she knows something valuable enough to repair Rupold's offense. This suggests her future memories include social and political details beyond disasters. She can connect people through what they actually want. Rupold signs because every alternative is worse. The moment is a victory without violence, yet its consequences are strategic. 5 million stars fund relief. Durandal is removed from its future path.
Count Nosto's network reveals vulnerability. The servants see tangible evidence that Amber's Western education benefits the East. The negotiation also establishes a pattern for future conflict. Amber does not need to overpower corrupt men physically. She studies incentives, collects information, and creates agreements in which cooperation is the least painful choice.
Expanded scene. Relief changes the castle before it changes the land.
Until then, Amber's authority is expressed through conversations and documents. Grain sacks, blankets, and clothing show that her decisions produce results. The warehouse scene matters because Eastern winters have killed people who survived monsters and war. Food alone is insufficient. Without insulation, fuel, and fat, weakened families die from cold or illness. Amber's detailed list proves she understands survival rather than treating charity as a public performance.
Heinrich's trust grows because the budget is disciplined. Genia's trust grows because Amber shares the benefits with servants. The knights' families gain hope. Even workers who never speak directly to Amber begin to repeat stories about the new Duchess. This creates political capital Belladonna cannot easily destroy. Fear-based authority depends on isolation. Once servants compare Belladonna's threats with Amber's aid, the former Duchess must rely on more obvious violence, which risks exposing her. Amber's gift to Genia is small in monetary value compared with the dowry, yet emotionally precise. It comes from the wedding dress that symbolizes Amber's second chance. By giving part of it to the maid who helped her begin again, Amber turns a symbol of forced marriage into a symbol of chosen loyalty. Calix observes the transformation, but struggles to participate. He has spent his life believing protection means handling burdens alone. Amber's success proves partnership is possible, yet it also makes him uncertain of his role. He wants to praise her, but praise feels intimate. When Amber asks if he is happy, his feelings become visible, and he retreats. The comic scenes of Calix scheduling training around Amber's meals reveal that emotional avoidance can be ridiculous, even in a dangerous political story. Bertrand fears the Duke, but he also fears Amber's growing frustration. Eventually, the servants can no longer maintain the arrangement. Amber's confrontation is important because she does not accept another decade of silence. She asks the uncomfortable question now. Calix answers imperfectly, but he answers. Their relationship advances not through a grand declaration, but through correction of a daily behavior. This is how the second timeline differs. Amber cannot prevent every misunderstanding, but she refuses to let misunderstandings accumulate for years. Each conversation removes one brick from the wall between them.
Expanded scene. The economy of survival. The story repeatedly shows that poverty is not background decoration. It determines who can act. Belladonna uses the shortage of money to justify seizing the dowry. Count Nasto uses the shortage of suppliers to control prices. Calix uses the shortage of imperial aid to justify personal sacrifice. Even Amber's marriage is affected because Calix believes a poor Eastern duke cannot satisfy a wealthy Western bride.
Amber changes the narrative by treating money as a tool with traceable consequences. 5 million stars can become jewelry locked in a room, but it can also become grain, blankets, research materials, wages, and weapons. The moral value does not exist in the money itself. It exists in the decisions surrounding it. Her budgeting also prevents a common failure of noble charity.
Sending a single shipment creates temporary relief, then leaves the underlying system unchanged. Amber combines emergency supplies with long-term agricultural research and trade reform. One plan protects the current winter, another prepares future harvests, a third prevents the army from entering war with broken weapons. The monopoly problem shows why fair intentions are insufficient. The Talesdos may want to feed their people, but Piazza controls access. A corrupt network can absorb any new money through inflated prices.
Amber, therefore, attacks both the immediate shortage and the commercial structure causing waste. Her Western education is essential here. The East initially treats business as a lesser activity compared with military honor. Amber understands contracts, routes, reputation, cash flow, and leverage. These skills become weapons as powerful as Calix's sword, because the enemy often appears as a merchant or administrator rather than a monster.
Rupold represents predatory commerce. Heinrich represents responsible administration. Lariette represents productive investment. Genia represents the workers whose lives are affected by decisions made above them. By connecting these people, Amber begins constructing an economy based on survival rather than extraction. The planned Linite trade route would complete the first stage. If the Western network can provide weapons and goods without Count Nasto, the East gains bargaining power even when it continues using local merchants.
Competition alone can change terms. This economic recovery may also alarm the emperor. A poor military house is controllable. A self-sufficient military house with Western connections is much more difficult to isolate. Amber must strengthen the East without allowing reform to be framed as rebellion. That tension gives ordinary scenes political weight. A wagon entering a warehouse may look peaceful, but it represents a territory moving beyond the limits imposed on it.
Chapter 8. Breaking Count Nasto's Monopoly. The East needed weapons before the Kale Kingdom War. Count Nasto's merchants profited from that need, selling poor equipment at unfair prices while forcing the Talesdos to remain dependent. Calix had endured the arrangement because refusing could leave his knights defenseless. Amber argued that dependence itself was the greater danger. If no Eastern supplier could oppose Nasto, they should trade outside the East.
Calix worried about distance, political interference, and the pride of his knights, but he agreed that continuing under the same terms would eventually destroy them. Amber proposed approaching her father and the light commercial network. The suggestion was emotionally difficult. Amber's family had wealth and connections, yet her memories of them were tangled with pain. As a child, she loved her father, and the family would always protect her.
She had once traveled to the capital with him, excited by every sight and convinced that someday she would become famous there. Her father laughed and promised to find the best guardian for her. Years later, an imperial document ordered Calix Talesdo to marry Natasha Light, the eldest daughter. The document contradicted Amber's own marriage and raised questions she had never answered. Why had Amber, the middle daughter, been sent instead? Had her family protected Natasha at Amber's expense? Had the emperor changed the arrangement, or had the Light family manipulated it? Amber remembered continuing to write home in the first timeline, loving them, even while their silence caused pain. Reopening contact meant confronting those questions. Yet the people of the East could not wait for Amber to resolve every private wound. A new Western trade route could provide weapons, food, and independence from Count Nasto. Calix's willingness to listen gave her the courage to choose action over avoidance. She told him that family could not remain enemies forever, and that sooner or later they had to face the Light household. Calix accepted the plan. Their partnership was beginning to resemble what their marriage should have been from the start, two people combining different strengths.
Calix understood the land, the knights, and military threats. Amber understood markets, social leverage, and future events. Each had spent the first timeline carrying burdens alone. In the second, they were slowly learning to share them. The source material ends as Amber's memories turn toward her father and the original imperial marriage order. In the past, she believed her family loved her as deeply as she loved them. Then something happened that changed everything. A message concerning the palace sends her father away, and the unresolved history of Natasha's engagement hangs over Amber's present decision to seek Western help. That is the next danger Amber must face. Saving the East will require more than crops, money, and weapons. She must uncover why the Emperor arranged the marriage, how her family became involved, and which people were already positioning the Talesdos for destruction. Expanded scene: the road back to the Light family. The plan to trade with Amber's family connects economic reform with personal history. The Light Network has the scale to bypass Count Nosto, but using it will expose why Amber was sent east. The flashback begins warmly. Young Amber travels to the capital with her father, excited by the city. She imagines becoming famous, and he promises to find the best guardian for her.
These memories explain why the later distance hurts. Amber did not grow up believing she was unwanted. The imperial order naming Natasha as Calix's intended bride changes the meaning of the marriage. Natasha is the eldest daughter, and apparently the family's favored child. Amber is identified elsewhere as the middle daughter. If the order originally selected Natasha, someone decided to send Amber instead, or the arrangement was altered before the wedding. Several possibilities remain open. The Light family may have protected Natasha because the East was considered dangerous. The Emperor may have changed the bride for political reasons. Amber may possess a quality connected to the future treason plot. Her father's sudden trip to the palace suggests imperial pressure. Amber's first life behavior shows she never resolved the question.
She continued writing letters home, hoping affection would return. Silence and pain did not erase her love. That makes the new plan emotionally risky. A purely strategic heroine could treat the Lite family as a resource. Amber cannot. They are people she still wants to believe in. Calix's support is therefore meaningful. He does not order Amber to approach them. They discuss the need together. He accepts that outside trade may be the only way to protect his knights.
This allows Amber to face her family as the Duchess of Talesdo, rather than as the abandoned daughter who once begged for attention. The cliffhanger promises that the next arc will test whether Amber's new confidence survives old wounds. Belladonna is an obvious enemy. Family betrayal is more difficult because love remains. It may also reveal more about Calix's marriage. The Emperor arranged the union, and the Emperor later destroys the Talesdos. The marriage could have been part of a long political strategy rather than a random alliance. If the imperial family feared Calix's sword, placing a Western bride inside the East may have been intended to monitor, weaken, or divide the house. Amber now has the experience to investigate. She has Heinrich's records, Genia's loyalty, Lariette's project, Calix's authority, and Durandal under her control.
She is no longer entering the Light household alone. Expanded scene: the Emperor's long shadow. The Emperor appears directly only in memories, but his influence shapes every present decision. He arranged the marriage. He denies aid. He orders wars. He eventually accuses the Talesdos of treason and uses Durandal against the East.
His fear of the Talesdo sword is politically rational, but morally destructive. Calix's house possesses military power that could threaten the throne, yet the Talesdos show no interest in rebellion. Instead of building trust, the Emperor keeps the territory poor and forces it into repeated battles. The policy creates the instability he claims to prevent. The East's poverty is therefore not a natural accident. Poisoned soil and monster waves are real, but imperial neglect magnifies them.
Count Nosto's monopoly flourishes because desperate territories have no alternatives. Belladonna can seize the dowry because household finances are collapsing. Calix becomes scarred because the Emperor repeatedly uses him as a weapon. Amber's reforms threaten this political design. Food independence reduces reliance on imperial aid. A western trade route weakens Nosto and creates allies outside Eastern control. Durandal in Amber's possession removes an imperial weapon.
A stronger partnership between Amber and Calix makes the ducal house harder to isolate. The marriage itself may have been intended to create vulnerability. A bride from a rich Western family could become a source of money, conflict, or surveillance. If the Light family substituted Amber for Natasha, that decision may connect to the Emperor's plans. The source deliberately ends before answering the question.
The Talesdos lack proof and remain vulnerable to a treason charge. She must strengthen the territory while appearing to fulfill lawful duties. This is why commercial contracts and agricultural research are as important as combat. They change the balance without giving the Emperor an immediate excuse to attack. Calix's instinct is to solve danger with personal sacrifice. Amber's future shows that this approach fails against a system. One swordsman cannot defeat famine, monopolies, propaganda, and imperial law simultaneously. Amber's role is to broaden the battlefield. Each small victory, therefore, has hidden political meaning. Calix staying home prevents Belladonna from consolidating control. Amber keeping the dowry prevents resources from disappearing. Laureate's research creates future food sovereignty. Rupold's defeat exposes the weakness of Count Nastos' network.
Contact with the Light family may create a Western alliance. The Emperor's shadow remains, but the East is no longer standing exactly where he expects it to be. Expanded scene. Amber's growth is not simple revenge. Amber returns with many reasons to hate. Belladonna abused her. Grace enforced humiliating orders. Rupold exploited the duchy. The Emperor murdered her family. Even Calix caused pain through silence and distance. A weaker version of the story could turn regression into a list of punishments. Amber chooses a harder path. She distinguishes between people who are malicious, people who are trapped by fear, and people she misunderstood. Belladonna receives resistance because she continues to choose control and violence. Rupold receives a contract he cannot exploit because he knowingly profits from corruption. Genia receives kindness because she was loyal when loyalty brought no advantage.
Calix receives questions because the evidence shows that his motives are more complicated than Amber believed. This discrimination makes Amber effective. Revenge alone would not feed the East. Humiliating Belladonna would not create resistant crops. Killing Rupold would not immediately replace Piazza's network. Amber's objective is survival and reform, not emotional satisfaction. She also refuses to romanticize her own first life. Amber recognizes that fear limited her actions. She was a victim of manipulation, but she also regrets failing to use the knowledge, wealth, and authority available to her. This does not make the abuse her fault. It gives her a place from which to change. Her courage often appears as preparation rather than fearlessness. Before meeting Calix, she reminds herself that she has endured 10 years with him. Before challenging Belladonna, she identifies the relevant law. Before negotiating with Rupold, she researches his scandal and writes a contract. Before approaching Lariette, she reads the girl's work. Amber still trembles. She still misreads Calix. She still feels hurt by her family. The difference is that emotion no longer decides the final action. She can be afraid and speak. She can be angry and negotiate. She can remember betrayal and still seek an alliance when the East needs one. This quality explains why people gather around her. They do not follow a flawless regressor who knows everything. They follow someone who sees their value and takes responsibility for her decisions. Genia is allowed dignity. Lariette is allowed ambition. Heinrich is allowed professional caution. The knights are allowed pride without being used as decorations. Amber's second life becomes a process of leveling herself as much as her husband. She develops political judgment, administrative discipline, and emotional honesty. By changing how she uses power, she changes what power means inside the Talesdo household. Expanded scene, the Knights and the coming Kale War. Amber's knowledge of the future makes every knight in the departure formation more than a soldier,
She remembers casualties. Faces that are healthy now appeared wounded or absent after the Kale War. Some died defending Calix.
Others returned to a territory too poor to support their families. This knowledge creates a moral problem. Amber cannot explain regression, and she cannot simply cancel every military action. Monster subjugation remains necessary. The Emperor will eventually order the Talesdos into war, and disobedience could provide the treason charge even earlier. Her solution is preparation. Sir Zeit leads the minor expedition, so Calix can remain at the castle. Amber promises to protect the territory while the knights are gone.
The promise is practical rather than ceremonial. She is already organizing supplies, agricultural research, and financial reforms. The knights' initial skepticism reflects Eastern resentment of Western nobles. They expect Amber to thank them, as though their danger exists for her comfort. She refuses to claim a relationship she has not earned. Instead, she acknowledges that she is new and asks them to complete their duty and return. The honesty matters.
Soldiers accustomed to being used by distant nobles recognize that Amber is not pretending. Her request to Sir Zeit also establishes that she respects expertise. She doesn't command him to obtain a mysterious object without context. She admits she needs his help and promises the request serves the East. The future Kale War remains the largest military threat in the current portion of the story. In the original timeline, it transformed Calix.
The younger man Amber meets is blunt, but emotionally visible. The future Duke is scarred, silent, and exhausted. Preventing that transformation requires more than keeping him from one expedition. The East needs weapons, food security, political allies, and enough financial independence to survive imperial strategy. Durandal adds another level of danger. The sword is not merely valuable equipment. It is an artifact capable of devastating the East and becomes connected to Amber's death.
By acquiring it through Rupold's contract, Amber changes the balance before the Emperor realizes anything is missing. Yet possession alone may not make the weapon safe. Durandal's history, its storage, and its connection to Viscount Viral suggest a wider conspiracy. Amber knows only the result from the first timeline. She must discover the chain of decisions that delivered the sword to the Emperor. Every reform, therefore, serves two timescales. Grain and blankets protect people this winter.
Rodan breeding may protect them in future years. A new weapon supplier prepares for the Kale War. Durandal prevents a later catastrophe. Amber's strength lies in connecting immediate household decisions with threats that have not yet become visible. Expanded scene, a ledger of the changed timeline. By the end of the available material, Amber can already compare two timelines. In the original past, Calix left immediately after the wedding.
In the revised past, he remains and publicly recognizes Amber. Originally, Belladonna controlled the dowry. Now, Amber retains legal control and converts the jewels into relief, research, and strategic assets. Originally, Genia remained a low-ranking maid who could only offer secret comfort. Now, she becomes Amber's personal maid and a trusted link to the household.
Originally, the servants called Amber abandoned and dirty. Now, more workers request positions under her because they have witnessed her protect Genia and feed the territory. Originally, Calix and Amber did not truly meet until years into the marriage. Now, they speak on the first day, share the first night without coercion, and begin correcting misunderstandings.
Originally, Lariat's research was recognized too late. Now, the botanist receives patronage 8 years earlier and begins working with Rodan before the food crisis becomes irreversible. Originally, the knights marched toward a future in which many would die while the territory collapsed behind them. Now, they leave with supplies being organized and the Duchess promising to protect their families. Originally, Rupold and Belladonna drained the ducal finances.
Now Rupold pays the full price, signs a legal contract, and loses Durandal.
Originally, the Emperor received the ancient sword that devastated the East. Now, Amber has intercepted it, though she still must learn how to secure it. Originally, Count Nasto's network seemed unavoidable. Now, Amber and Calix are planning an external trade route. Originally, Amber wrote to her family from a place of helpless longing. Now she considers approaching them as a political partner with her own authority.
These changes do not guarantee victory. Some create new risks. Belladonna may act more violently because she is losing power. Count Nasto may retaliate when he learns what Rupold signed. The Emperor may notice that the East is recovering faster than expected. The Light family may refuse cooperation or reveal a deeper betrayal. Regression does not remove conflict. It changes Amber's position within it. She is no longer the final person to learn what is happening.
She is becoming the person who moves first. Expanded scene. The cliffhanger behind Natasha's name. The final marriage document changes the emotional direction of the story because it places Natasha where Amber expected to see herself. The order names Calix Talesdo and Natasha Light. Yet Amber is the woman who became Duchess of Talesdo and died beside him. That discrepancy suggests a decision hidden from Amber. Her father may have received the order and then negotiated with the palace. Natasha may have refused. Amber may have been offered as a replacement because she was considered less important. The Emperor may have specifically requested a substitution after learning something about the Light family. The source gives no final answer, so the uncertainty must remain intact. What matters now is how Amber approaches the mystery. In the first timeline, she accepted the marriage and continued longing for approval. In the second, she has learned to question legal documents, financial arrangements, and family traditions. Her plan to contact the Light Network will force a confrontation with the past before she feels ready. Calix needs weapons. The East needs trade. Avoiding the family would protect Amber emotionally, but endanger everyone depending on her. The scene also places Calix in a vulnerable position. If Natasha was the intended bride, he may not know the full story either. Amber could fear that he would prefer the elder sister, or that their current relationship is based on another person's discarded engagement. Those fears could revive the same pattern of silent assumptions. Their recent promise to speak honestly will be tested. Amber must decide how much to tell Calix about her memories without revealing regression.
Calix must decide whether to treat the Light family as useful merchants, possible enemies, or relatives connected to his wife. The father's sudden departure for the palace implies the Emperor's influence was present from the beginning. The marriage may have been one move in the strategy that later led to the treason accusation. If so, understanding the substitution could reveal why the Talesdos were targeted and why Amber's child was considered dangerous. The available story ends before that door opens. Amber has changed the immediate future, but the deeper design behind her marriage remains untouched. Her next victory will require not only courage and negotiation, but the willingness to learn whether the family she loved chose Natasha over her. That question provides the strongest continuation point. The audience has seen Amber defeat enemies she understands. Now she must face people whose love she still wants. Final character synthesis. Why Amber and Calix need each other. Amber possesses memory, commercial education, and emotional insight gained through loss. Calix possesses military authority, local legitimacy, and a sincere commitment to the people of the East. In the first life, those strengths remained separate. Amber stayed outside public affairs, while Calix tried to carry everything through combat. Their second partnership works because each corrects the other's blind spot. Amber sees future political and economic traps Calix would otherwise endure. Calix gives Amber immediate authority to implement plans that would be impossible for a foreign bride alone. Amber also teaches Calix that protection without communication can become another form of exclusion. He wants her to live as though she were still in the West, untouched by Eastern hardship.
She tells him that she is not an ornament to be locked safely in a cabinet. She is the Duchess of Talesdo and has the right to share responsibility. Calix teaches Amber that direct requests can be answered. The man she remembers as impossible often agrees when she explains what she needs. His behavior does not erase the harm of the first timeline, but it proves that history was shaped by more than a fixed personality.
Their romance grows through administration, law, and survival rather than dramatic declarations. Calix falls for the woman who challenges his assumptions and cares for his people. Amber begins to see the vulnerable young man beneath the future war hero. Their awkwardness is not separate from the political plot, it is part of the repair. If they learn to trust one another fully, the Emperor will face something he did not encounter before. A Talesdo house with both sword and strategy. Calix can defend the border. Amber can prevent enemies from controlling food, money, information, and alliances. That is the real meaning of leveling a husband to the max. Amber is not simply increasing Calix's power. She is helping him become a ruler who does not stand alone, while she becomes a duchess who no longer disappears behind other people's decisions.
The story has only reached the first stage of that transformation. The next stage begins with the Light family, Natasha, and the unanswered order that brought Amber to the east. Expanded scene. What the current ending has already proved. Even before the mystery of Natasha is resolved, Amber's second life has proved that the future is not fixed. The most important evidence is not a dramatic prophecy. It is Calix himself.
Amber remembered a husband who returned from war covered in scars and disciplined nature, but he blushes, hesitates, waits outside her room, worries that she dislikes him, and becomes jealous when she asks someone else for help. The difference reveals how much the future damaged him. Saving Calix, therefore, means preventing the conditions that force him to harden.
He needs competent people to share responsibility. He needs money that does not come from endless monster hunts. He needs weapons before the Emperor sends him to war. He needs a wife who challenges his habit of deciding everything alone. Amber also needs to be saved from a future version of herself. The abandoned Duchess was not weak because she lacked intelligence. She had never been given a safe place to use it.
In the new timeline, she applies commercial knowledge, remembers future discoveries, reads laws carefully, and wins loyalty through practical compassion. The ability was always there. Their relationship can succeed only if neither person treats the other as a project. Amber cannot simply use Calix's authority. Calix cannot simply hide Amber from hardship. They have to recognize each other as equal participants in the same future. External reforms are beginning to work, but the oldest private wound remains. Amber has learned to confront Belladonna and merchants. Now she must confront the possibility that her own family helped place her in the marriage that destroyed her first life. Whatever answer waits in the Light household, Amber will not arrive as the frightened middle daughter who once accepted every decision. She will arrive as Duchess Amber Talesdo, supported by a husband who is finally learning to stand beside her. One final change deserves attention. Amber no longer measures success by whether everyone approves of her. In the first life, she waited for Belladonna, Calix, the servants, and her family to confirm that she belonged. In the second, she acts according to evidence and responsibility. Approval often follows, but it is no longer the condition for action. That independence makes her more capable of love, not less. She can care for Calix without surrendering authority. She can value Genia without turning kindness into debt. She can support Lariette without claiming the research as her own. She can negotiate for the East without pretending every Eastern custom is noble. The future emperor defeated a divided household. Amber is building a connected one. Every honest conversation, recorded expense, protected servant, supplied village, and researched plant reduces the isolation that once made the Talesdos easy to destroy. The coming conflicts will be larger, but Amber will no longer face them as an abandoned duchess.
alone. Ending. A second life built one decision at a time. Amber has not yet prevented the final tragedy. The Emperor still fears the Talesdo sword. The Kale War still approaches. Belladonna remains inside the castle. Count Nasto controls major trade routes. Durandal carries the power to devastate the East. And Amber's own family hides unanswered secrets. But the future is no longer following the same path. Calix stayed at the castle on the wedding night. Amber established herself as the lawful Duchess. Genia entered her service. Heinrich recognized her ability. The knights departed knowing their families would be protected. Lariat began research that could create crops resistant to Eastern poison. Relief supplies reached the people before winter. Rupold paid the true value of the dowry, and Durandal was taken away from the root that once delivered it to the Emperor. Most importantly, Amber and Calix began speaking honestly instead of allowing fear to decide what the other person meant. Amber once believed she had been sent back only to correct her own regrets. She is beginning to understand that every change in her behavior also changes the people around her. When she respects Calix, he listens. When she trusts Lariat, the researcher gains confidence. When she protects Genia, the servants find courage. When she challenges corruption, the East gains resources it had been denied. The title is not simply about making Calix stronger. Amber is leveling up their entire partnership. She is giving a young duke the political and economic support he never had, while Calix is giving her the authority and safety she was denied in the first life. Their growth may be the only force capable of defeating the future Amber remembers. For now, the story closes on the mystery of the Light family and the marriage order naming Natasha. Amber must decide whether returning to her childhood home will provide the trade route the East needs or expose a betrayal she is not ready to face. If you enjoyed Amber's first victories and Calix's unexpectedly awkward side, follow the channel for the next part. Leave a comment with your prediction about Natasha, the imperial marriage order, and the secret behind Amber being sent to the East. Like and share the video so more readers can join the journey before the next chapter begins.